Hello, everyone. It's Coach Fred here today. And today I'm going to be extending what we were working on in class and talk about the graph of a log function to help us understand how exponentials and logs really relate to each other. So we now know that an exponential function's inverse is a log. So we're going to use the graph to just kind of help us. So when I ask you how are y equals 2 to the x and log base 2 of x equals y related, and sometimes I want to write it like this, y equals log base 2 of x. They're the same thing. It's just the symmetric property. Remember that if I was really thinking about this and I didn't know anything about logs, then the way to write an inverse equation would be just to flip the x's and the y's. So this would be 2 to the y, or so x equals 2 to the y. But then we normally solve for y to get that inverse equation. So I want to show you again how this log turns into 2 to the y equals x. So remember, I kind of showed you the that you can turn a log into an exponential equation by using, maybe I said Bucky calls it the fishhook, I call it around the world. You write it as 2 to the y equals x. So 2 to the y equals x. So these are the exact same equations, except we're going to look at it using the log. All right, so let's look at the graphs and see how they're related. So I think we know already how to graph y equals 2 to the x. So I'm going to make a quick table for myself. We know that y equals 2 to the x has an asymptote at y equals 0. So I'm going to draw my asymptote in like that. And I'm going to plug in some numbers. So we always want our y-intercept. So 0, 1, and then I'll put in 1. If I plug in 1, I'll get 2. So I'm going to plot those points, 0, 1, 1, 2. We know its general shape is something that grows like this, so exponential growth, and it looks like that. The y-intercept, again, 0, 1. The equation of the asymptote, y equals 0. And actually, let me make this a little bit smaller so you can see it all together. Oops. There we go. All right, and our domain and our range would be, we can plug in any number we want. So we say that's all real numbers. So negative infinity to infinity. And the graph has to be above the asymptote. It can never reach that asymptote, which we've been talking about. So that would be from 0 to infinity. Now, we have learned a lot about inverses. So if I didn't know anything about the log and I just wanted to look at the inverse graph, then all I would actually need to do would be to flip the points. So the points would become 1, 0 and 2, 1. And if it had a horizontal asymptote, a y equals asymptote, this would now, if x's and y's flip, it would go from y equals 0 to x equals 0, so a vertical line. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that in. So there's my vertical line. I'm going to plot my points, 1, 0, 2, 1, okay? So now it's going to be everything to the right of the graph instead of above the graph. So my x-intercept is 1, 0, and my graph's going to actually look like this. And so if x and y's flip, we know domain are the inputs or the x's, so that's going to become my range. So negative infinity to infinity. You can see that clearly from the graph, whereas the domain now is changing from 0 to infinity. Okay. All right, so you can see that these two, again, inverse functions, that means they're going to reflect over the line y equals x. And you can kind of see that they actually really do that really nicely. You're going to need to recognize why the equation of an asymptote switches, why the domain and the range switch on this graph. And we are going to be translating the graph. Now, a couple things that we talked about in class, I just want to make sure you kind of understand, is that based on this graph, this value right here, we call that the argument, that value can actually never be 0 or negative. So never 0 or negative. And the graph clearly shows that, okay? And I think that that's really, really important to see. And it's similar to the exponential in that the y values, this output, the whole output is never going to be 0 or negative. So kind of connecting the dots through the graphs, I think are going to help us as we start to investigate logs and how to use them. All right, hopefully that was a helpful video. Have a wonderful day.